Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Internationalizing Rural Science Teacher Preparation, Action Research for Global Competency. I am Daniel Kastner, the Acting Faculty Fellow for the School of Education's Global and International Engagement Office. On behalf of our office, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you for this important discussion. As we all know, science education is crucial in preparing students for an increasingly interconnected and interdependent world. This is especially true for rural students who must be equipped with the knowledge and skills to thrive in global contexts. Science teaching is not just a local endeavor, it is a global mission. Today, we'll explore ways to enhance both the quantity and the quality of science education to prepare students for the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. We're honored to have two distinguished colleagues with us today. Dr. Valarie Akerson is a professor of science education here at Indiana University in Bloomington, and Dr. Vesna Dimitrieska is the Director of Global Education Initiatives at the Hamilton Luger School and the School of Education at Indiana University in Bloomington. Both have been deeply engaged in efforts to improve global science teacher education, working with educators across the United States. They will share their experiences, discuss successes and challenges, and highlight strategies for advancing science education in rural communities. We would also like to acknowledge the contributions of Dr. Gayle Buck, who has played an important role in this project but is unable to join us today. Before we begin, a few quick housekeeping notes. This webinar will last approximately 1 hour and it will include a Q&A session at the end. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat or Q&A box at any time. We are recording this session, and the recording will be available for those who may need it. With that, I'll welcome you to the webinar, and I'll turn things over to Dr. Vesna Dimitrieska to begin our discussion.
Great. Thank you, Dan, for the great introduction and for the opportunity to share the work that we do. I just want to also start by acknowledging that I'm not a science teacher educator. My background is in language education, but through the work that I do, do a lot of global education initiatives, and then I was very fortunate that I got to work a lot with Valarie and Gayle, with Drs. Akerson and Dr. Buck, on various initiatives that support internationalizing the curriculum. As Dan mentioned, I am based physically in the School of Education, but I'm shared between this school and the Hamilton Luger School of Global and International Studies. And specifically, there are several units there that support the work that I do. The project that we will be talking about today was supported by funding from the Longview Foundation, and then we had supplementary funds from several different units from the Global School, like the African Studies Program, the Center for the Study of the Middle East, Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, Inner Asian and Uralic National Resource Center, Robert F. Burns Russian and East European Institute, and the Center for the Study of Global Change from IU Global. I know this is a mouthful, but the work that I do wouldn't have been possible with the support of all of these centers, so that's why I wanted to give them this shout out. So science education is really increasingly global. We cannot deny that, and this is why we saw that there is an opportunity and there is a gap that we wanted to fill when we got to do this work for Internationalizing Rural Science Teacher Education Program. So science knowledge is increasingly global in context, and we talk about things that are related to climate change, to disease and pollution that may be local here, but then there are things that are happening globally that may affect us here in our local or regional context as well. also science literacy is increasingly global in nature. What we mean by science literacy is that the definitions of science literacy evolves over time, and that we are seeing that aspects of its global nature are being integrated in it more and more. At the same time, STEM careers are increasingly international in nature because there are a lot of careers that or opportunities or positions that may be STEM related, but then involve working with teams who are from various parts of the world and that involve building or having global competence to be able to function in those types of contexts and those types of settings, because global competence is a critical 21st century skill. And that's kind of the thinking that we had in mind when we were coming up with the design of this project, and the gap that we identified that we wanted to fill with the work that we did with this specific project, but we're also continuing to do.
All right. And so I'm Valarie Akerson, and I am a science educator, but I am not experienced in the global realm. And so I'm really grateful that we are partnering with Vesna, because she helps us understand ourselves, because one of the problems in science education, and it's on the next slide, I think, is that most teacher preparation programs, especially in the United States, are really the least internationalized sort of university units. So it's sort of like we are trained as teachers, but thinking about teaching just in our context in the United States. And then the people who are the teacher educators, me, who have to change these programs so that we can foster global competency, like what Vesna was saying, we were prepared in those same least internationalized university units. So we're trying to figure out a way that we can sort of use our expertise, because we do have some, we're not stupid or something, but we don't know the best ways to reach like global science education. So partnering with Vesna helped us learn some stuff. And then from that, we can help other science teacher educators.
So we wanted to, again, establish some foundations that drove our work, or that are still driving our work. So that's why we'll provide this framing of the work that we did, and then we'll look into more specifics and examples of the projects that everyone who was a part of this endeavor completed. So initially, I wanted to just establish that we talk a lot about globalization and internationalization. Sometimes these two terms are used interchangeably, but for the purposes of the work that we do and overall in international education, there is a distinction between globalization, as globalization being the movement of people, ideas, goods, capital, music, and diseases across borders, whereas internationalization is how we in higher education engage with that reality, how we respond to globalization. So globalization is more, as at an individual level, maybe we cannot control it, or we may contribute to it or not, or decide to contribute or not to it. But then internationalization is how we react to those globalization trends and things that are happening all around the world and here locally. Through the work that this project entailed, and the work especially that I do, is within internationalization at home framing, which means that the things that we do, we want these things to be available to all the students, and especially to those students who are not able to go and study abroad or teach abroad or even travel abroad. So because only 5% of American students have a chance to study abroad when they're in as a part of their higher education experience. So this is why internationalization at home has been in place, or has been happening for more than a decade now, in an effort to provide these global learning experiences for all of our students. We do not want to also see the internationalization at home as the second best, because typically study abroad is seen as a gold standard, but internationalization at home has the potential to serve as much more than the second best to study abroad because of its role or because of the way that it can be integrated across any of the content areas. And that's what we sought to do with this project. So what knowledge does a globally competent teacher possess? So it is not about being able to recall factual information about populations in different countries. I know that in my elementary education, which was not here in American context, I know we learned about how many sheep there are in Australia and things like that. So it's not about that. And especially now with technology and with AI, those are the things that we can very quickly access and know, unlike maybe some generations earlier when we had to learn all of those things. So it's also not about being able to recall practices of specific cultures. And it's not supposed to supplant the content area knowledge. So this is all integrated with the content area knowledge, and it shouldn't be an add-on to the content knowledge either. So globally competent teacher's knowledge should focus on reflection. Reflection is key at all stages of this process. It should also focus on synthesis, on critical analysis of resources, events, and experience. And I want to point out the word critical here, because it's easier if we ask our students to just regurgitate or to memorize something that we have given to them, or the students themselves might say, well, just tell me what is right. But there is much more benefit and transformational maybe advantage when students are able to critically analyze resources, events, and experiences. And finally, globally competent teacher are infusing cultural and global knowledge across the content areas, as is in K through 12 education, and also as Dr. Akerson mentioned, in teacher preparation programs, very often that global component is seen as an add-on, as something that you do once a semester maybe, or if the teacher, him or herself, is not into that, or even if they are into it, they are doing it much more than some other people. But we want to move that mindset and that thinking or the practice from having it as an add-on to integrating it across the content areas. So the Bloom's taxonomy is a great example of how we can do that and how we can internationalize by having all these different levels of Bloom. So we're not saying that rote learning or the memorization is bad. It is bad if that's the only thing that they're doing. But if we are diversifying and adding all the levels of Bloom's taxonomy, we will be more likely to have students or teachers, future teachers, or in-service teachers who are globally competent. So what is global learning? Global learning involves cross-cultural understanding and engagement. It used to be just cross-cultural understanding, but more and more definitions of global learning are evolving to include engagement, because it's not enough if we just understand each other cross-culturally. How do we engage with the other? How do we engage with someone who is different from us across various types of lines? How do we then make sense of the engagements that we have so that we better understand each other? But if we don't engage, I think that's what we need to do more. It's also about global systems and interdependence awareness. It's knowing that the world functions as a system, and there is an interdependence between various aspects of those global systems. Global learning is also about intercultural communicative competence. And it is about, as I just mentioned earlier, critical analysis of global issues. It's not only knowing that that something is a global issue, pollution is a global issue, but how do we analyze that so that we maybe as an individual can make a change or take action to not have that not be a global issue anymore. It's also about understanding of global and local connections. Very often when we talk about global, it's usually taken to mean as something that is out there, that we don't care or we don't maybe do. But global is equally about local things as it is about global things as well. So that's why as educators, we can start maybe with things that are local in nature and then make those global connections, or we can start globally and then bring how those issues are translated or how they are happening in our local context and what we can do about them. There are several frameworks that our participants in the projects that we offered to them, and they integrated in the projects that they developed. One of them is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are goals that United Nations set for the whole world, for all the countries, to work on towards 2030. So the idea is that, oh, I'm sorry, you're not seeing it. Uh, there it is. So the idea is that by 2030, we want to have no poverty, we want to have zero hunger, or we want to have quality education for everyone, or we want to have peace, justice, and strong institutions. I think the beauty of this framework is that it encourages systems thinking, and it also encourages this notion of creating wicked students that are able to tackle problems that are wicked, that are not just simple, but that require working with other people, that cannot be solved on their own. So that's why someone might choose to work on a project that is on one of these UN Sustainable Development Goals, or they can integrate and work on two or more of them, because one cannot talk about no poverty even without quality education, or no, someone cannot talk about clean water and sanitation, or even gender equality without quality education. So that's why I think teachers find this framework very teacher friendly, and especially they can see connections to the academic standards that they do or they have to follow in their everyday practice. People can also join teams all over the world who are working on these individual goals. And the idea is that we know that by 2030, it's not very likely that we may remove all poverty or have zero hunger. But all of these goals are aspirational. And I think that's what we want our students to see, that maybe they cannot solve all the world's problems, but they can work towards them and help in some way. The next framework that we offered to our teacher participants was the global competence framework that has been established by Asia Society, and in it they talk about 4 domains of global competence. One is investigate the world, second is recognize perspectives, third one is communicate ideas, and fourth one is take action. So someone can choose to, maybe they think that they do a good job in their course when it comes to recognizing perspectives and communicating ideas, but maybe they don't prepare their students enough to take action. And taking action can also just mean, it doesn't always have to mean protesting and being on the streets. It can also mean posting on social media to raise people's awareness about different things. So the definition of take action is very broad. And then the next one is that this framework for developing global and cultural competencies to advance equity, excellence, and economic competitiveness. And within it, they talk, it is from our own Department of Education. It was released in 2017, and they have 4 domains: collaboration and communication, world and heritage languages, diverse perspectives, and civic and global engagement. So the word engagement comes up again, and they kind of map out what each of these 4 domains can or should look like across the various educational levels. So this framework can be used as a reality check, but also as a roadmap in terms of, well, what can people do in order to move the needle when it comes to global and cultural competencies. Also, this was shared, and this is specifically pertinent to K through 12 school leaders. It was a report that was released by ASCD and the Longview Foundation, and they talk about 7 tenets of globally competent school leaders. That if a principal or a superintendent wants their school or district to be more globally, to nurture global competence in them, that should be visible in in their vision and mission. It should be visible in the pedagogy and the practices of the teachers and even the staff who are there, because it should be not only in the curriculum, instruction, and assessment, but also in the collaborative professional community in those contexts. It also about one of the tenets, like the fourth part of it is situated action, knowing that the activities that we do towards global competence should be anchored in our local communities, and there should be advocacy and community engagement. We could use the resources that are available to us in our local communities to work towards this. So it's not just something that we are doing with people from abroad. And it's also about systems and structures. These systems and structures need to be in place for all of the other 5 domains to function. So Valarie now will talk to us about our effort, what we did.
Okay, so given all that, and that we didn't, I mean, for me, it was new. All of that information was new coming into this project. Now, I don't know about Gayle, because, you know, maybe being nearer to Vesna, she might have gotten some of that. But but collaborating with Vesna, we were able to use science education's maybe processes to help all of us learn these and kind of make a difference. So our goal then was to develop a peer-led teaming approach, meaning we found other faculty across the United States at this point to help prepare ourselves. So science teacher educators, we tried to improve our own practice to include the locally driven, like the local issues, yet focused on global science education programs in our own science teacher preparation program. So this took place across the US in this first round, finding other science teacher educators who wanted to work in this area. So we tried to increase our levels of global competence. So all of the information that Vesna shared before, we tried to learn those kinds of things to help ourselves know that, so then we could teach them to our pre-service teachers or whoever we were teaching. So we want to increase our ability, our efficacy, our knowledge toward teaching those teachers to teach global science education in their own future teaching settings, and then increase the frequency and quality of those global science educations in the schools. So then hopefully it will translate into the K-12 schools after they become teachers. And then through that, we wanted to develop a community of practice so that we could share struggles, successes in implementing these ideas regarding global science education. So we thought about the social constructivist theory because we wanted to, all of us, construct an understanding of global science education and be able to actually implement that then into our whatever teaching setting we had. So there were methods courses and science courses. And so we wanted to like work together, because as the next point is, when humans share commitment to a shared domain of interest and then build relationships, so that was a big thing, is building relationships among these colleagues, it will enable us to learn about that practice. And so we have a community of practice. Like we still keep in touch with those teachers, for instance, as we got to know them very, very well. And by teachers, I mean science educators. So we include ourselves as teachers too. So and we're considering the community of practice in terms of transforming our practice. So we want to look toward transformative theory of practice, making ourselves realize that global education is part of whatever science instruction that we're doing. So transforming what we think. So we wanted to transform our practice within this community of practice that we built, and then focused on developing our knowledge of global competence, which we wouldn't have been able to do it without Vesna. So, I mean, you have to have specialists in both areas. We might have known science teacher education, but not science teacher education that included global competence. And then enhance our understandings of our practice, and then foster critical reflection. Are we actually doing what we think we're doing? Are we making the difference that we hope to do?
And we did this by gathering 15 teacher educators, science teacher educators from across the USA. I know that when we initially got the funding and the idea with the project, we were worried that, well, how will we able to find this many people? And then we ended up having, I think, more than what we I mean, initially we didn't even have to advertise it too widely. I think we did it once through the professional networks and the associations, and there was a great response. So we were not able, and we were even able, with the support from the units that I mentioned earlier from the global school, we were able to add teacher educators beyond the number that we had applied for the original Longview Foundation funding. So they were all from different parts of the United States as well, and they were all, and the criteria for selecting them that they have to be primarily serving like a rural teacher education populations. So that was one of the basic principle, because that's what we wanted to do. It's not just that maybe urban and suburban, especially urban, may have access to these kinds of experiences more, but then when it comes to rural teacher preparation programs, that's becomes even worse, and it's an issue of access. So initially we conducted 3 workshops. This was also in the early, well, we were still not able to meet in person because of COVID at the time. So all of the 3 workshops were virtual. We did a global competency workshop at the beginning. Then some way halfway through it, we did assessing global competence and global learning, because that is another huge issue when it comes to internationalizing curricula and internationalizing teacher prep programs. Because what counts as success? What do we mean by if they got it or not? And we needed to know what are our options. Some people looked and used some global learning outcomes and integrated those into their courses. And yeah, and then at the end, we had another work, not at the end, they all happened towards the, I mean, not how, yeah, they were all equally distributed, but they were not all at once. And then another one was the action research workshop, where we introduced the idea of what each participant needed to do for this project in their own context. And with this was that the idea that is that the teacher educators themselves know the best their own students and the populations that they serve and their own context and what they already do. They may all recognize some things that may qualify with or are associated with some of the domains that I mentioned earlier when it comes to global learning and global competence. So we asked them to do something next or more to what they were already doing. Some people were not doing maybe anything and they had to do this from scratch. But it was the idea was that we were not telling them what to do because of that community of practice, but they were choosing what they could do. We did provide individual supported action, research, design, implementation, and analysis throughout the process. We conducted check-in sessions. They were optional, but we always ended up having people check in and drop in on these sessions and talk about things. And yeah, and then our final event was an on-site symposium here at IU Bloomington, when we brought everyone who worked on the projects here on campus, and they presented what they came up with and how their work evolved over time. Now we'll talk about the outcomes. I'll give an overview of the projects that resulted from this collaboration, from this community of practice. We had different settings for the project. Some of them were in elementary and secondary methods courses, and some of them were in content courses. So 2 groups incorporated children's literature, and then we had 4 groups combined globalization with other science teaching strategies, and 6 groups then used strategies to bridge local to global knowledge. So as you can see, there were very different things that people did depending on the course that they taught, but also depending on what they could do with the student population that they had. And then one children's literature group used literature in a multidisciplinary assignment to create global awareness of geographic, scientific, and cultural uniqueness. Another group used children's literature to help pre-service teachers see how science is done around the world. With our support, we were able to provide books, science books that are high quality literature that do not intensify or do not reinforce some stereotypes that people may have about certain cultures. So we also had those 4 groups that added globalization to existing strategies by incorporating into scientific inquiry, those global connections. There was scientific argumentation through climate change, and then we had global socio-scientific issues. There was someone who used COVID-19 data at the time because it was such a huge thing that we all lived through and with, that they used data sets from all around the world in terms of how vaccines, I think, was approached and distributed and things like that, that related to so that the students have a chance to not only think about what was happening in their immediate environments or even their own state, but even broader globally. Next, 4 groups used environmental issues to highlight local and global issues, and those involved climate change. And then 3 groups used water quality to make those local to global connections. And then finally, 6 groups in science content courses bridged local issues into global issues, and 5 groups of those 6 used what their students saw locally to connect globally. And then the 6th group explored indigenous knowledge to connect to global perspectives.
So what did we feel as teacher educators? What changes did we feel? So we, across the board, felt like we could actually teach global science, global issues in our science classes, our science, whatever our setting was. So we increased in our own efficacy in our abilities to incorporate global issues into our classes. And it also supported content learning and strategy learning. So it didn't mess up our class by adding something, and enhanced the classes. We also, all of us, felt that it was very important to develop that community of practice so that we could sort of share ideas and kind of bounce those ideas off of people so that, wait, will that work? What do you think it will work? And then some of the people actually collaborated across settings too, so that they could see how different things worked in their setting versus another setting. Like some of the children's literature groups worked together. So it was interesting to see that the community of practice really was super important in helping us make those changes. And then finally, what did we do as an outcome? Well, we have an edited book that resulted from this group. This was our original plan, was to publish all of those action research studies that everyone did. And so this book came out a couple of years ago, and it includes, introductory chapters and all the things that we did, but it also includes all of the individual action research studies. So you can see how those studies came out and how they influenced students in those classes. We had a book chapter that described our program, which we talked about again today. It was in an edited book that actually, I'm really glad that we're in there, because I'm enjoying reading the other chapters because we don't really talk about professional development for teacher educators, but I feel like most of us want to have professional development. So how are we going to help ourselves, become better at what we do? And there's lots of great ideas in that book, which I'm really happy I have. So part of what the individual science teacher educators did as the grant was to make individual presentations at their own local sites. That was part of the program. So they presented at their own universities what they had done and how they were part of the program. We also did national presentations at different conferences around the world, like NSTA or NARST, or those different ones that are science focused. And then most recently, we started collaborating with some European partners. That started last winter.
Yeah, this time last
spring. It's sort of talking with people across the globe about ideas that we might have to grow this program a little bit. And then that's the copy of our book, and then that's the copy of the book that our chapter is in. So that's our references.
Yeah.
So anyway.
And I wanted to wrap up before we start with the questions by this powerful, what I thought was powerful. I recently came up with this book called The Power of One. And the idea, it's a book that was released recently. It's an open access book. Anyone can access it. It's a University of Minnesota book from a group of faculty members there who involved in different types of internationalization, curriculum internationalization, and also campus internationalization. So each one of them, similarly to us, this was specific to University of Minnesota, but they came up with this publication and they call it The Power of One. And as I was reading through the examples, I think it was in the introduction where they talk about that power of one and what it means. And I think that sometimes being teacher educators could be very isolating, or we might think that we're not making enough change or difference in our students. But the idea with curriculum internationalization is that if one international educator who is working on international curriculum integration starts with small scale changes, and those small scale changes can be maybe just even updating your reading list so that involves more maybe authors from different parts of the world. There are not only just Western scholars. Another small change could be that they include a virtual exchange component to their course, or they connect with pre-service teachers in another part of the world and where they talk about a science issue and how that issue has been tackled or even taught in those contexts. And then that person, whoever did the curriculum internationalization, share what they did with their colleagues, and then they built upon that, and that those types of things can lead to small changes across the curriculum. And then if this is done equally, if this is done frequently, or even if this is done, period, this can lead to transformed programs, which themselves can lead to transformed minds that are not only open to different ideas, worldviews, and ways of thinking, but that are actively seeking those out, that they want to hear someone who has a different idea and a worldview or thinking. Then they are also recognizing the strength that comes from those multiple perspectives. So I thought that this was a powerful, so I think to me it was a good reminder that, well, does anyone care about what we're doing, or what does this make any difference? But I do believe in the power of one, and that what we can achieve, even with those small incremental changes in the way that we do things. So yeah, I'll stop sharing, I think, now. And yeah.
At this point, I would like to invite attendees of the webinar to click on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you can begin typing your questions for Valarie and Vesna. And we do have the first question from an audience member who asks, how did you push teachers' thinking at times when their plans looked very conventional?
I can try, Valarie, or do you want to go ahead?
Go ahead, because I'm thinking this is probably you that did it.
Yeah, well, it was for me, being a part of being the only international educator in the group with a lot of science teacher educators. It was very a great experience for me, because I saw some patterns and some things that I learned that I don't want to generalize, but for example, I noticed that people were less willing to engage, maybe, or they were engaging with data or with case studies, but not with people from other parts of the world. And then and I think that those were some of the things that we discussed in our in-person meetings that we had and during the conversations. And many people said, well, what I do next, when I teach this course next, I want to connect with a biologist or something in Peru or things like that. So it was one way of going beyond those types of conventional or like types of thinking that people were maybe have been doing for many years and are not comfortable to do things differently, was that's why we had those check-ins. People were stuck. People were not, well, I don't know this. How can I teach my students this? And I think those check-ins help to talk through some of those things and offer some alternatives. And then it was ultimately to the teacher educators to decide what they could do. Another thing was that I think when we were doing the revisions of the chapters, even with the using of the terminology of globalization and internationalization, I remember when we were offering, we all read each other's chapters. It wasn't just us, the editors, who gave feedback. Everyone else read chapters, but also we, when we were providing feedback, one of the things that we asked them to be consistent, that we use globalization as this kind of a force almost that affect us all and that cannot be controlled by one person, but internationalization is something that I individually can do in response to that. So, and whenever we saw, especially me when I was reading the chapters, whenever I saw that someone was using it interchangeably, we would offer to them why we think it's internationalization and not globalization. And I think that was it. I think it was that iterative process of going back and forth, both during our check-ins, but also during the preparation of the chapters, that some of that thinking may have changed. We know also, as Valarie mentioned, that several of the people who are in this project have went beyond and expanded what they did when they saw what kind of experience it was for their students and how much the students enjoyed it, because the student buy-in could be another aspect that students were like, well, why do I care about how they deal with pollution in Somalia or things like that? So, yeah.
Great. Another question, an attendee writes, thank you for this webinar. It was interesting to know science from a global lens. I have one question regarding the selection of the topic for this project, as you mentioned climate change, COVID-19, and other environmental issues topics. But I'm curious to know if you took some hard science topics, such as topics of biology content. Did you take on
So
biology
what we
or?
did for the topics is that the teachers were encouraged to choose topics that fit in their class already. So if they had been teaching biology, then certainly they would have included a biology topic. But most of them were teaching an environmental science course, or they were teaching a methods course. And so they were brainstorming what kinds of topics might cross global issues, like thinking about what would be an issue, a global issue locally, like what Vesna was mentioning, the global. So what's local, and local issue, can I compare that globally? And so some of those topics seemed maybe, I don't know if easier is the right word, but more easily embedded into a methods course, where they could compare sort of what happens locally to what happens globally to another issue. So I think that's probably why those were selected. But there's no reason you wouldn't want to put global issues across hard sciences.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then in my role, I work on different initiatives, and we have had people across campus who are physicists who did this, and who are biologists. And then the whole idea is that even the way you do lab can be a way of internationalizing the curriculum, because how do you even, when it comes to math, how do you approach textual problems in math, or how do you do math? How do you behave in class? Like some of those things can be all ways of dealing with this, but absolutely about biology, because we have seen all of these things happen. And sometimes people think, well, how is this even possible in a course like that? Or we don't have the time to do that. Well, are we then preparing our students for the realities of today's world if they're not able to talk to someone who looks or sounds or is different from them? Because those are the things that we have to keep, I think, in mind, that like what is the big picture? What do we want with all of this? Are we want our students to be agents of change or and contributors to the world, or do we want them to be just producing things and knowledge that already exist?
Wonderful. Another attendee writes that they love your note that it starts with small scale steps. Did teachers also recognize their peers' ideas as being a rich push in their own thinking? And maybe you have some examples or stories to tell.
Well, I think they definitely did. I know Vesna jump in because I can rethinking about the children's literature groups. They always talked about oh, what children's literature could we use, and then what ideas about science could we teach. That's just one example. And then they ended up collaborating. So I knew that they kind of valued each other's ideas when they collaborated on the action research. So that's one example. But pretty much the collaborative meetings were like everybody giving advice and suggestions and sharing ideas. So I know they valued that, not just our ideas, but they talked to, like we had breakout groups where they could talk as subgroups, like the content people, the elementary methods people, the secondary people. So they all got a chance to like share ideas amongst each other as well. And I think they really valued like the opportunity to share those ideas.
Absolutely. And I can, I mean, just, confirm what Valarie said, then maybe expand from other contexts when I have seen curriculum internationalization done. A few years ago, there we had a project in which we brought School of Education, College of Education deans to talk about internationalization. And even the opportunity to be in the same room and talk about those things was very much appreciated and welcomed by people. We also have had here on campus, the Center for the Study of Global Change has an Institute for Curriculum and Campus Internationalization, and it's an international institute and people can come. It's usually at the end of May and do that. But then in addition to that, there is funding. I mean, this is a plug for some funding too, if people are interested. If someone is interested to internationalize their curriculum, there's funding through the Center for the Study of Global Change. And if you're interested, I can share that information with you. But across campus, or there are some people who have been a part of the Global Classroom Initiative or the client-based integration of global experiences that are available to all of us, or they may have developed a UN Sustainable Development Goal badge for their courses. So people have done different types of global learning experiences. But it's amazing when they have a chance to get into the same room over a brown bag. It could be like over coffee too even. And even though they're from different disciplines, they still can learn so much from each other when they are given the space to share what they have done, because they can recognize the things that they may have done, even though they may be in such a different discipline from their own. So yeah, absolutely.
Great. Another attendee asks, do you also provide strategies to teachers to teach science topics with a global lens perspective, or did the teachers come up with their own strategies?
So these were experienced science teacher educators, and they sort of already knew strategies for teaching about science. So we didn't really focus on strategies so much, but how to incorporate the global lens into their teaching. So their action research was basically sort of like, if you already know how to teach inquiry, if that's your common practice, then how are you going to incorporate globalization or internationalization into your teaching for your students? So it might be different if for them when they're teaching their own pre-service teachers, maybe they are trying to teach strategies with that, but we weren't really trying to focus on strategies because they were already experienced science teacher educators who were then, trying to incorporate globalization and internationalization into their courses.
Another attendee, Vesna, did you have
No,
something to
no,
add?
I
I'm
think
sorry.
Valerie said it all.
Okay, very good. Well, another attendee writes, thank you for the excellent presentation. My question is on the data collection, especially the criteria for selecting participants. I understand they were all from rural settings, but I am wondering, how did you choose the states the teachers worked in? How many were there? Is the 15 number of teachers a good representation of the whole country? Is this attendee's question.
Well, I don't think we had anyone from the West Coast.
No, I don't
But
think
we
we
did,
did.
yeah, we did have a lot of people from Midwest, and I'm just looking through the chapter. Maybe that's something that we should have included, like the states where they all came from. I know we had people from Georgia, we had someone from West Virginia, yeah, but
And then
we didn't exclude anyone because of the state where they were. They
yeah,
all, if they wanted to participate, if they gave a good, in their application, a rationale for why they want to do that, we by all means accepted them.
yeah.
So yeah, we didn't like say, oh, you're from this state, we don't want you. We wanted anyone who wanted to do this to join us.
Yeah, I think we accepted everyone, even the extra people who applied, like Vesna mentioned, like her her resources actually added funding to support them. So anyone who wanted to participate and they had a good application, obviously, like Vesna mentioned, was admitted. And our intention really wasn't to be representative of the country. It was just to see if what could be the outcome of a group of people who wanted to do this, like in their different settings, what could we do at the initial try? So yeah. So I mean, yeah.
And I have a question for the two of you.
Sure.
In your presentation, Valarie, you mentioned that there isn't very much in the teacher education literature on the professional development of teacher educators. And both of you also talked about how you approach this collaboration with very different areas of specialization. And it seems to me that you both had a very valuable professional learning experience yourselves. So I was just wondering if the two of you wanted to um, talk a little bit about your own professional growth and learning that came from this collaborative effort.
Do you want to go first, Valerie?
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, just being around the discourse with science teacher educators was a learning experience about what, I mean, of course, I know what scientific inquiry is, but then all those other, the lingo, like the other concepts that they talk about regularly. And so then like thinking how that can be then integrated with the global learning experiences that we want our students to have. So it was definitely a learning, um, great learning experience for me, because after our official publication of the book and after that symposium, we have been invited to other things, and where we have had some of our contributors from the book join us to be on panels when we had, there is a Georgia consortium here that colleagues of ours do with minority serving institutions in Georgia. And then we all presented there. So it's absolutely been very revealing, and yeah, I feel that with any interaction and any time we went together to present at conferences, I've always learned something new. And that's what I in fact like about curriculum internationalization, because there isn't just one single way of doing things. There are multiple ways of making it work. Yeah.
Well, for me, I've been in this field for, I'm not going to say how many years, just kidding. I don't remember, to be honest, but enough. So I've had a lot of experience teaching methods courses, being a science teacher educator. And one thing I know for sure is that I don't know everything there is. And so it was for me a great opportunity to even enhance my teaching, my own personal teaching, let alone get to know other science teacher educators around the country who were also sort of like-minded. And I got to know Vesna, which was a good bonus, because I mean, without her, this would not have happened. I mean, yeah, we're a bunch of science teacher educators wanting to put globalization into our classes, but maybe it's really internationalization, right? But we didn't know the difference. So we had to have a collaboration in order to make it actually work. So, and it worked well. And, you know, and again, like what Vesna says, we're being invited to do other types of work in this same area. And not just us, like me or just Gayle, but our team. So it's not, they see us sort of as a team, I think.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I'm noticing the time, and as we wrap up today's webinar, I first wanted to extend my sincere thanks both to Valarie and Vesna for sharing their insights and expertise with us today. Their work in advancing global science education is both interesting, inspiring, and very important. I would also like to thank all of you for joining us today in the audience for your thoughtful engagement throughout our session. And thank you for your interest and participation throughout this session that made our discussion so valuable. We hope this conversation has provided useful perspectives and ideas that you can take back with you to your own work. And before signing off, I wanted to mention a quick reminder that a recording of this webinar will be available to those of you who would like to revisit this webinar for in the future. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at future events from the Office of Global and International Engagement. And we hope you all have a good rest of your day.